Well, a while back, I told you a horror story with a really beautiful, happy ending. And today, I got another horror story with not such a happy ending. Remember, I told you about the wild Mustang that I adopted and worked with and trained, and he became a close friend, and we operated as one. And then I eventually had to find a new home for him, and through a long series of events, found just the right place. And if you've not heard that sermon, look for the one that is entitled "The End?" question mark. The End question mark. But what I've got to tell you today is about another horse for whom the end really was the end. You see, at the time I got my wild horse from the Bureau of Land Management, a lady from our church also got one. And whereas I began working with mine day by day, she really did not. I mean, she had 2 kids already, was halfway pregnant with another one. Her husband worked shift work, and he didn't really want to get involved with it. She really didn't have the equipment that she needed or the setup. And so her horse just stayed in a corral, doing nothing. Well, after I finished training mine, she said, "I will give you mine if you will train her too." Okay, it worked on the stallion. I mean, everybody knows that a stallion is much badder and tougher than a mare. And so she'll be easy work. Well, brought that mare over to the same corral where I trained and made friends with my Mustang. But it was different. It was different from the very beginning, because I found that this particular mare was not so much mean as she was terrified. She was terrified of almost anything human related, scared her to death. And I would chase her into this stout, well-built chute that I mentioned to you once before. And I would do the thing of trying to put my hand on her back, and hopefully then I'd get where I could put it on her neck and so forth, get to where I could touch her all over. Listen, I never got past touching her on the back. Do you know why? It's because when I tried to touch her on the back, she freaked out so awful. She got so scared that she started kicking and snorting and pawing in every direction. And what happened, every time she would get her leg, she would kick through one of the boards. And these were rough cut oak boards, really thick, really strong. She would kick through one of those cracks, and once she kicked, it wouldn't let go. She treated it like the tar baby, and she just kept kicking. She just kept kicking. And it didn't set her free, but it did. It did cut and rub all the hide off of her leg. It would bloody her up something awful. And so what happened was, every time I worked with her, she would hurt herself so bad that it took 2 weeks for her to heal up enough to work with her again. So scared that she kept hurting herself. Of course, having no idea that I was trying to help her, because the same thing applied to her that applied to most any horse in those days. Any horse that nobody could do anything with was going to wind up at the meat packers. That's where she was headed. She was on her way to hell and in a hurry. And I was doing my best to be her savior, But she didn't get that. She didn't see it that way. Oh, no, no. I was the devil to her because she didn't understand what I was doing. Well, I gave up on trying to touch her and work with her in that chute because she would hurt herself so bad. So I got to where I would tie her to a post in the middle of the corral. I put two other big protection posts in the ground so that I could get behind them when she whirled around and tried to either kick, paw, depending on which direction I was standing in. Well, along about that same time, somebody gave us the cutest little black lab pup I've ever seen, I've ever had. In fact, it was the first puppy I'd ever had all my own. A couple of times, once as a kid, we bought a family dog. That was a puppy, but I don't have much recollection. This was my first puppy. And it was a little girl. I named her Jill. And that little Jill, she just followed me everywhere I went. Me and Jill, we were close. She thought I was Jack. And we would just go up hills and down the hills. She didn't come in the house, but she'd follow me around in the yard. And I got to where when I went somewhere in the truck, if I was going somewhere, say over to another field or a friend's house, I might take her with me, put her in the cab. She was just always at my heels. And so one day, as usual, it was time to feed this horse, this mare, whom we eventually named Widowmaker. And we went to feed Widowmaker and got over there, and I noticed Widowmaker was in an especially foul mood. I said, I'm just getting tired of this. When is enough ever enough? And I said, I got to teach her some manners. I'm going to teach her something today. So I managed, after about 15 minutes, to get her roped and tied and securely fastened to that post in the middle. And, of course, I had the two protection posts. I was out there easing around, trying to just touch her, and actually did get a hand on her and stroked down easy without lifting my hand. And then I started up, and she looked out of the corner of her eye and saw that cougar claw coming and busted into this wild frenzy of kicking and stomping and squalling. And I just took off running. And I was about, yard and a half away when I heard this poor, pitiful squeal. And I turned just in time to watch the wild Widowmaker stomp the life out of my little puppy Jill. Poor little Jill didn't realize the danger. She'd never been around anything dangerous. All she knew is she was following her master. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I tell you what, I'm not an easy crier. But I sat right down there. I picked her up. I held her. I sat down right there where she lay. And I noticed she was still alive. And I put my hand over her ribs, and I could just tell everything was broken up, something awful. And I just cried, and I held her and felt her breathe. And then no breath. 1,001, 2,000, 1,003, another breath. And then limp. Oh, I sat there and cried. You know what I did? After moving Widowmaker, the mare, out of the way, I dug a hole and I buried little Jill right where she fell. That seemed to be the place. And I continued working with that wild Widowmaker mare for a while longer. But I eventually had to give up. Eventually had to give her up, had to send her to a cell, and I'm sure whoever got her had to probably got destroyed. More than likely she went to hell, to the meat packer place. And I look back on that, and it makes me a little bit sad, but you know what it doesn't do? What it does not do? It does not make me mad. When I think about Widowmaker, the mayor, and the murder she committed, it does not make me mad. Not at all. Why? Because I realized there's no need for me to hate this mayor. In fact, I can forgive her. You know why I can forgive her? Because she knew not what she was doing. As Jesus said from the cross, Father, forgive them. They know not what they are doing. You've heard me mention that saying of Jesus before. Wow, it's one of the most important things I can stress to you today. So many of the terrible things we do to one another, we do not knowing what we're doing. That is, it's terribly wrong. It's awfully hurtful. It's sinful. There's no excuse for it. But to one who has a little higher perspective and can see that for what it is, that scene in the corral, Widowmaker didn't wake up that morning and think, who can I destroy today? Maybe a puppy will come by and I'll get to stomp the life out of her. No. In fact, I doubt she ever even realized what she did at all. All she knew is she got scared and she heard some strange sounds and saw me acting in an odd way. So I could not hate her, for she knew not what she was doing. She had no concept of what she was doing. Now, why? This is where we go to the next level. Why did Widowmaker operate that way? We could say she was an awful, evil horse for being so wild, destructive, murderous, and mean. We could say that, but it would not really be accurate. If the more you know about horses, especially wild Mustang horses on the western prairie, the higher your knowledge is and the more you're able to realize that the reason she's that way is that that's the way she had to be in order to survive ever since she was born. And if she'd not been just that scared to run and avoid anything that was a threat, if she'd not been just that rough and aggressive when she was cornered and couldn't get away, she probably would have been long dead. What I'm saying is that there was a time in Widowmaker's life when she was running free on the prairie when that kind of behavior was the very thing that kept her alive. But now, everything's changed. She just doesn't know it. Now, we've got a very different situation. The situation now is that the very things that used to keep her alive are now the very things that are going to destroy her. Because if she keeps operating that way, if she continues with that same mentality, doing the things she's doing, she's going to leave her master, anybody who works with her, her master in particular, with no choice but to give up on her. And that's when she's created a hell of her own, and then she moves into it. self-sabotage, oblivious to what she's doing. Oh, I'm not giving you, though, a documentary on horse behavior. I hope you know me well enough by now to know this ain't about horses. This is about you. This is about me. Because we, like that Mustang, we get threatened. We get scared. And when we do, we get mean. And I've noticed this in myself and others now for years. The more insecure a person is, the easier it is to offend them. On the other hand, the more self-confident they are, the better their self-image, the harder it is to offend them. Because they don't really need somebody else to build them up. The more insecure we are, though, the easier it is for us to feel threatened. And when we are afraid, some of us are more like the flight animal, some are more like the fight animal. We get afraid, and some of us, our first instinct is to run. And that's how people run through life from job to job, from marriage to marriage. It's always somebody else's fault, even though God in each of those marriages and each of those jobs could have done some very important training in them that would have changed the rest of their life for the better. Oh, but they would not have it. They ran. Others have a different type disposition. When something threatens us, when we're afraid that we're going to lose something we value, we're afraid something's going to be taken from us, whether it be a material possession, money, or whether it be, our reputation. Some of us are ready to fight. Mixed martial art, Las Vegas leg lock fight. That's how some of us respond. But either way, whether you run or whether you fight, you miss out on the training that God would have provided if you had stayed there in that corral, surrendered to what he was trying to do, and he would have taught you so much. He would have trained you so well that here's what he'd done. He would have moved you to a higher level of understanding. And you can get to the place when you cooperate with God in whatever miserable corral he's got you tied up in. When you cooperate, when you surrender, though it's scary, though it hurts, he transforms you in such a way that the things which once terrified you no longer threaten you. And the things which once made you fighting mad no longer ruffle you. Remember we talked about a few weeks ago, the bigger the person, the bigger thing it takes to push their buttons and make them go off. Whereas the smaller the person, the smaller the thing it takes to push their buttons and make them go off. Some days I'm bigger than others. Some days I'm embarrassingly small. But I know this business of levels of perspective that I'm talking about is the most important concept I want to communicate today. Here's why. A wise man once said, I think it was Einstein, the the problems that we have cannot be solved on the same level of thinking that created them. Now, some of you immediately know what that means. If you're like me, you need some help. You need an analogy. So here we go. What was Widowmaker's problem? Her problem was that she had a very low level of understanding and awareness. She had a very mixed up understanding of what was a threat and what was not a threat. She was very, very confused about what was going on and why it was happening. Very low level. And as long as she stayed on that level, there was no way she was ever going to change. What she was going to have to do by submitting to the trainer pulls her up to a higher level. And now that thing that used to be a problem, she sees that totally different. And she looks back and says, remember how I used to be so easily intimidated, so easily offended. Remember how much time I used to spend worrying about stuff that seemed important? But now I realize it wasn't. What's happened? She is no longer on the level that created those problems in the first place. She's moved to a higher level where everything looks different. It's a matter of awareness. The more you grow spiritually, the more awareness you have. You become aware of things that you once did not notice. Do you remember the time that I told you how currently I'm big on picking up litter? Man, if I'm walking, every time I go walking in the woods, I take a trash bag with me and I pick up cans that people threw out, styrofoam, bottles, everything. I pick it up. Well, do you know, once when I was 16 years old, I took a load of trash of my own out on a dirt road and just dumped it, the whole thing right there, because I saw where some other people had dumped too. And some of you remember, the owner of the land drove up while I was doing that. He said, "You cannot dump here." And I was thinking, why not? And he was thinking, this is my land. You cannot dump here. Now, put every bit of that back on your truck and take it to the landfill. And so I started to work, picking it back up. He drove away, and as soon as he drove out of sight, you know what I did? Raked it off, took off. And you know what I went away thinking that day, because I was on such a low level of awareness? I went away thinking, who does he think he is telling me not to dump in a place where this is obviously a dump? Oh, what a low level of awareness. I didn't understand the concept of owning land, paying lots of money for it. Your life savings is invested in it. You're trying to keep it in good shape. You want it to become more valuable. You want to pass it on to your children. I couldn't see that. But I've grown since then. If I go walking on your land, I'll pick up half your trash. And it's all because as I've grown, awareness increases. And spiritual growth is really about awareness. Remember, when your awareness of yourself increases, your awareness of God and everything else increases. Look at Genesis 28:16. Genesis 28:16. I'll read it straight from the text. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I wasn't even aware of it. When he lay down that night, he had no idea God was anywhere around. God was around, but he had no idea. However, after that experience of seeing the ladder, his own level of spiritual understanding raised. And he realized God was here. I did not even realize it. And I just realized now I don't have enough time to tell you what I really needed to tell you. And yet I'm not going to keep you, because the mind can only absorb what the butt can endure. So I'm going to have to stop there. For now, there are some things you can know. For now, there are some truths that you can act on. Start realizing that when people around you do and say things that you know are ridiculous, say, Father, forgive them. They just don't know what they're doing. If they knew what they were doing, they wouldn't be acting. And also, when somebody else does or says something that simply doesn't make sense to you, sounds far-fetched, don't just automatically assume that they are a freakazoid. It may be that they've seen some things you haven't seen.